This is meant to be the wrap-up video to week 6, which was Tyrannical Sanguine Explosive. This was also the week that was just before the launch of 10.0.5. I intended to wait one day after reset, after 10.0.5 went live, to make this video because I didn't have a whole lot to talk about from that Sanguine Explosive Tyrannical week. I was basically just playing my Mistweaver caster build for another week, trying to push up some tyrannical keys and get my kind of chores done for my ults, my other healers, to get them ready for 10.0.5. And it felt like, at least coming from a somewhat smaller Oceanic community, it's pretty obvious when people, well, not as many people play for a week. The group finder goes from a couple of pages of Oceanic keys to maybe like half a dozen. And instead of having 10 plus kind of push keys for me, which are 21s, there might only be one or two of those keys going at any given time, even prime time. So last week it was pretty apparent that a lot of people were probably doing something similar to what I was doing, which was getting ults ready or having a week off kind of from Mythic Plus, not really going too crazy, just getting ready for 10.0.5. So like I said, I didn't have that much to talk about, which is why I wanted to wait one extra day to see if anything like big, any like standout changes were shaping up for the meta, and that has now been, I think, 3 days. So this video is a little bit overdue, and I'm going to be talking really not much at all actually about week 6. I'm going to be talking about how 10.0.5 has shaped up for me or changed what I've been doing, and how I see the meta kind of changing over the next couple of weeks. I think it's an interesting time for healers right now, and I personally can't think of another time in the last at least couple of years, going back to, I mean, maybe even Legion, definitely not in BFA, definitely not in Shadowlands, where it feels like the meta now, or at least like high Mythic Plus keys, the healers you can play is more open or more diverse now than I believe it has been in years. 10.0.5 has been a surprise for me. I thought it would shake up the meta a little bit. I thought maybe the kind of healers on the top and the healers at the bottom would effectively stay there, but they would kind of group closer together. So I assumed that going into 10.0.5, we would still see Evokers and Druids in S tier, but maybe Mistweavers and Disc Priests, instead of being in, you know, D or F or something, would bump up to C or something like that, right? But I think what we have now instead is actually a meta where balance is so close that the major deciding factor, at least for me, for what healers I pick to take into keys and what I want to play for the day or the week or something, has come down to fun. I'm actually logging on to healers to run push keys or pug push keys based purely on which healer I am finding fun right now. And I have not had this experience at all throughout all of Shadowlands, BFA, and it never felt this way. And I think the stark difference for me has been that prior to 10.0.5, so let's say earlier on in the season, I could push a relatively high, let's say Tyrannical Halls of Valor, and I would get to Herja, and if I was playing a healer that didn't handle the Eye of the Storm mechanic particularly well, or I was playing a healer that had lacking throughput and I had to really rely on the other members of the party to keep themselves alive through those kind of mechanics, I could get to that point in the boss fight, and if we wiped because I couldn't keep everyone alive, or the whole group couldn't keep themselves alive, including my healing, I would often think, well, okay, if I want to push a high Tyrannical Halls of Valor, I guess I just have to play an Evoker, or I have to play a Druid, or I have to play a healer that's more meta or more powerful than the healer I'm playing right now. And the biggest difference with the patch has been that I don't feel that way anymore. I honestly feel like I could take any healer into any healing check in any dungeon, and the only thing that would really matter is how well I play. Obviously, things like how much gear I have and me pressing the right buttons at the right time and everything plays a huge role in that, but I don't feel like I could brick a key now by just the spec I chose to play. Now, obviously there have been healers, like the really good players from each healing spec that have managed to make things like, or healing checks like, Herja's Eye of the Storm possible. But that isn't something that I personally have been able to replicate. I guess I'm just not good enough. I don't have geared enough characters. I am just not playing well enough. At least prior to the patch, that's how I felt. There have been shamans, like Resto shamans, that have been able to heal, I don't know, like 22 Herges or 23 Herges or something, but I would get to an 18 or a 19 and start struggling. Up until 10.0.5, the healing meta was fairly set and fairly simple. Druids and Evokers had the most healing. They also had the most healing during cooldowns, so like they had the best ability to heal through healing checks. They also brought the most damage, and they both specs also had excellent utility. So that was the meta, that was it. But what's interesting now is that we have Resto Shamans doing huge amounts of damage. We have Disciplined Priests with proper AoE throughput, like proper cooldown throughput as well. We have Holy Priests with crazy single target damage. And the healers that were, I guess, somewhat lacking in throughput are no longer lacking. The only healer where that might still be a limitation is Resto Shaman, but I think for every other healing spec, throughput is no longer what holds them back from pushing higher keys. The meta prior to 10.0.5 has been roughly the same for the past 6 weeks, the whole of the season. And that has been Druids and Evokers at the top, Paladins slightly below them, and then the other 4 healers somewhere mixed around B, C, and maybe D tier, with Mistweavers routinely being in F. I think a large part of the Mistweavers being in F was really just that their participation is the lowest of all healers. They have the fewest number of players actually playing the spec. So the way I've thought about it for the past 6 weeks has just been that you have the top 2 healers, Paladins a little bit behind them, but still competitive, and then the other 4 healers are kind of just a mix throughout the rest of the tiers. And what I find really interesting with 10.0.5 is that I think we're actually going to be moving into a point where their healer tier list each week is going to look more volatile, but that's just because every healer is viable. And the tier they fall in for any particular week is going to come down to which healers deal with different affixes ever so slightly better than the rest, which healers are the most fun to play, which healers are people most comfortable with and pushing with, and which healers are actually best for which particular dungeons. I think that's something we haven't seen so far. Resto Druids and Evokers have just been good in every dungeon always, but we might be like really heading into a meta where maybe the top groups play priests for the dungeons that have one big pull, where power infusion is a huge advantage to take into a key. Or maybe the dungeons that have the tightest timers see Resto Shamans healing them because they do the most damage. Maybe dungeons that have good MC targets or get good value out of Master Spell will see priests. Maybe Mistweavers, Druids and Evokers will become more popular on Sanguine weeks for their knockbacks. And I think what is happening right now is we're actually seeing healers move around the healer tier list simply based on one player's performance. So Zaylia picking up his Disc Priest for a couple of push keys with Gingy's group looks like it's now pushing Disc into A or even S tier for the coming week. And all of this might seem very volatile, but I actually think it's the best state of balance that the game for Mythic Plus has ever had. I really do think people are going to play Resto Druids just because they like playing Resto Druids, not because Druids are just better than every other healer in every other way, like they have been for the past month and a half. I think we're going to see Disc Priests played a lot just because a lot of people like the style of Disc healing. And Disc is now viable in all content. So the purpose of this video, I guess, is to just try and open up the discussion, see how other people are feeling with this, see if I might be huffing the copium a little bit too much. But I really do think the meta is in the best place it's been in for a long time for healers. And I know that I am personally picking healers that I just find fun to play, and I'm not worried about whether or not that healer with my gear and my level of play can heal a key. I now think that all healers can heal all keys, and what it really comes down to is just what do I find most fun. So hopefully other people are having similar experiences. I'm interested to hear what healers people are swapping to, because everything I've just said is also going to have somewhat of a delay, because most people, it's going to take time to gear up. Most people can have 5 or 6 sparks now for their ults, but gearing them up is still going to require quite a few catalyst charges, and dozens and dozens of 16 plus dungeons to get your 418 gear and stuff, so good luck with the grind if you have decided to play more alts or swap mains. Let me know how you're enjoying 10.0.5 or what your opinions are in the comments, and I'll be back in a couple of days with a more in-depth targeted video with the healers I've been playing in 10.0.5 and the builds I've been experimenting with. Thanks for watching, and algorithm stuff.